Hello everyone, today we talk about the tetralogy of victories, a definition I coined, let's say at this point, to give a better, thorough definition to victory in its political, fundamentally, in cultural definition, as we gave it in the last video we made on the uncertainty of victory, to express essentially the flexible, right, the unlimited, at a certain point, at least difficultly circumscribable boundary of the substance of victory herself, right? Which naturally, as you know, is a concept deeply connect with the idea of war as the continuation of politics by other means. Clausewitzian one we have at this point been well acquainted with from more almost 2 years now on the channel. And that we will define at the end of this video, passing however through a pentalogy, right? That will essentially make us compare the most familiar idea we have of victory, that can be even, I don't know, in sports, in games, with the actual definition that is given of victory, recognition, and these 5 points that define the both of processes, and realize how we can point out these 4 essential characters of victory. This is important because in the last video we have definitely explained the difficulties existing in defining victory proper in reality, right? Looking at history and saying, here we have someone who won or who lost. We will dedicate ourselves, I was saying that video, to defeat equally, which is, in my opinion, much more overlooked than victory, at least in its political and social consequences, and concretely also in the new conflicts can arise. Victory is overlooked in as much we think it does exist with a certain almost, there is there's an assertive way of saying, that was the guy who crashed, that destroyed, that won, that defeated. But if we really look at history, this is actually rare, right? There are, of course, certain realities that were literally wiped out. We're talking about entire peoples, countries, cultures, right? This is what war does all the time. Right. Remember always that war is not just naturally the greatest hybridizers of cultures. It's one of the greatest, but also one of its greatest potential destroyers. And this is a concept very much stressed by the victors most of the time. This is probably the only valid key for reading such actually an anti-historical phrase like history is written by the victors. Like ask Flavius Josephus, that's the case. History is not written by victors, it's written by historians. And also you realize, just thinking of, victory is this magnetic, polarizing, almost obsessive concept, right? But think historically, wherever you come from, there's surely some nationalistic background to the historical narrative of the country. Right? And in there you realize that if your country was defeated at some point, even dominated, received some of the toughest blows, and was largely destroyed, etc. But there is always this sense, this realization of continuity, which is also a myth, right? Just like the idea that history is written by the victors, but it's still reflecting a reality that is that there's still a people there. There is still something burning under the ashes of the defeat, right? I don't know, think about the wars between France and Germany during the 19th or 20th century, right? That the countries are still there, right? They've been also naturally defined by that clash, and not just negatively, because of course think about just the importance and the bond that exists between France and Germany in Europe, that their primary importance within the European Union, etc. But also we realize perfectly well through this observation that things never end there, right? That it's very rare to find in any situation a people that was literally exterminated, right? Of course, you can find things like pandemics, major. Think about, Native Americans largely. Maybe that's not really just one factor, but seemingly, it explains a lot of the millions died that had much less immunological resistance than Europeans. And naturally, the Europeans were exterminated them largely as well. But Europeans that eventually, look at Central South America today, lived with the remnants of these people that were often the majority that remained there, that still have their culture, their tradition, their legacy. So what is a victory, right? Here, naturally, the divide is thinking, imagining, fantasizing some kind of a total victory, right? A complete annihilation. But we know also by Clausewitzian terms that this is exactly the point. This is not true. This never happens. There are always intersections. There is always somebody. There is a meeting ground, even after very harsh defeats and oppression, and so on. So the picture is always more complicated, and or at least more complex than the one it seems, and which historical narratives gives to it, right? And this narrative is mostly political and cultural, and this is fundamentally what we're looking at now. So in the last video, we observed the winged nature of victory of Nika in the Hellenic mythology, and that symbolizes very well the volatility, literally, of victory itself. That is, you can gain it, but that won't stay there for much, so much the Athenians would, literally cut the wings to Nika to say, remain with us and do not fly away. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that in reality, but not even in, in divine matters, let's say. And there is an interesting analogy and parallelisms still in Hellenic mythology. Think about To the Most Beautiful, which was written on the golden apple that Eris threw at the feet of the vanities of Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, and which the unfortunate Paris gave to the latter, the one with the most convincing arguments, I would say. So who is Eris? Eris is discord. It's discord in Latin term, and the one we still use the meaning for today in English. And Eris is winged, just like Nika. And this is not a change. This is not random, because victory, so an achievement, a fulfillment, properly an accomplishment in this conflict is as volatile as the same discord sometimes brought to the break of it, to breaking out of hostilities can be, right? And this is pernicious because Eris causes a hell of a damage at that point, as you know. And the question here is also realizing how, from sometimes unadverted, even in here we have Paris that is immortal and that actively makes a choice in causing the discord, but fundamentally the golden apple there represents something that goes beyond, in a way, even the human control on the issue. Right here, we even see goddesses being judged by a mortal, right? And very important goddesses, not heroines, let's say. The golden apple here represents something that goes beyond, that is wished by from both the deities and humans, and that becomes, in fact, the apple of discord, literally, as it's used metaphorically, to realize the object of contention, that in this case is material, but it's naturally has a dramatic moral impact on the situation, because all these goddesses were very jealous of their own beauty. So the question here, and this is interesting because we're talking about even a cold-blooded and deity of war like Athena, that is the one that crushes Ares, the warriors, that is it's the citizen soldier in the wisdom of the polis and so on, that is sensitive, however, as a woman, as a female, to such issues. So this tells you dramatically well how the golden apple here, the apple of discord, is something that can't touch everybody. That it literally means that no mortal and even not immortal at that point, is immune to conflict, to resentment, to envy, to whatever causes eventually conflict to happen, which sometimes is not even provoked actively as an insult. There was a competition of beauty there, right? And Paris was just called as an arbiter. And that was the game. As we will see now, there is a set of rules that were shared also in the competition, and that yet eventually will go beyond, far beyond the competition itself. And this is, in fact, as we'll see in the pentalogy rather than in the tetralogy, the important difference between what we can give, as a create as a game, and what eventually people will do about it. And you can see it just if you're a sporty person, if you're into games, something, what the bitterness that derives from defeat, even when you accept the rules of it, right, or disappointment or whatever you may feel like. At the same time, also the kind of the hubris deriving from victory itself at a point. So, in speaking of this aspect, in fact, the most familiar idea of victory for us is exactly this one, the sporty, game one. That has 5 distinct moments in a in the conflictual process that does exist. That is somewhat, restrained, mitigated conflict is a controlled conflict ideal, but it's not always being the same way, which we will see about the military pentalogy. So, first point, this familiar idea of victory is that, first of all, in the game, the contenders share a set of rules that will condition their actions, right? So they allegedly agree on this, right? They at least recognize the fact that these rules do exist, and that they will also behave according to them, hopefully. Then, second point, the competitors in the competition are defined. That is to say, you literally pick those people, and that's them, and there can't be anyone else, right? And you can easily, in practice, make them stay out, right? If you're not an athlete, you can't even compete at a certain point, at certain levels. So that's also pretty clear in a game, in a sport. 3, competitors accrue credits, literally points, that are awarded according to the rules during a finite and known set of comparisons, right? So you are evaluating whatever these players are doing, right? They are running. Whoever arrives first to the end of the track wins. That contains the set of the rules. The guys are respecting them fundamentally, and you actually compare their performance on the base of those rules, right? And then you can compare, and these people get points, get evaluated, which sometimes is also not so easy in sports or games, because not everything is so kind of physically checkable at some point. In games especially. Fourth point, at the end of this set of comparisons, right, there is, of course, a result that is required by the rules, right? It is literally the assignation of victory. 5th point, this victory is publicly certified with the award of a prize, because the prize is fundamentally the recognition, is the certified proof that you achieved that result, that you were the best one, that you won. So this is how we are all acquainted since our childhood, to games, to competitions, and so on. This can actually go as well for school, like tests. This kind of also intellective performance it's fundamentally the same, right? It involves a competition. It involves the realization that there is already within the set of rules that that this is kind of a form that is filled eventually by by human beings that have motivations that go far beyond the formality of this realization. Naturally, the prize there acquires a meaning, right? The formal victory acquires a meaning that is different for every person who receives that, right? And we all can have our own motives to participate to that. So victory is known to us as a clear assessment. Victory in general at this point is a clear assessment of a pre-established goal. That marks the transition between the process for obtaining the prize and the prize itself. Right? This cut marks the end of the competition as well and certifies its equivocal outcome. That is to say, we are used to conceive victory as something, okay, I want to obtain that, right? And we have a kind of a clear idea most of the times of what that thing is, right? Or at least we think we have. We attach a certain meaning to it, a certain value. It is integrated in a set of information about understanding of the world for which we think that thing, if achieved, will give us something that we want to obtain. But that is also something that we have to reach, right? We have that is located at the end of the line, and within this line there is a moment, there's a struggle, right? That, if successful, will determine our acquisition of that prize, right? And this can go actually in different ways. I mean, here the idea of victory, naturally, we study from a military perspective, and we know it from a Clausewitzian point of view, always involves properly the concept of competition with others, right? Remember the laws of reciprocity in the Clausewitzian theory, we talked about them. Well, this is exactly the thing. You're not fighting alone, you're fighting against someone else, right? And sport is amazing because it also teaches you to struggle with yourself, right? And that's beautiful because arguably knowing yourself and testing yourself is one of the single greatest achievements you can have. So here we could extend the things philosophically speaking, but at least from a person that practiced swimming for 12 years. The most beautiful thing there was not much competing. Yes, it could be satisfying to arrive first or whatever, but the question was there, I want to train myself to achieve a certain result that will boost my morale, my spirit, my body, and that is something I want to achieve for other reasons, right? Because I want that a girl likes me because I'm fit, or because I am persistent, I'm resilient, and all this stuff. There is always our own reason, right? And as you understand, this is very flexible. This depends much on individual psychology mostly, and that's also, in Clausewitzian terms, the prevalence of moral forces that is always there, right? It's not much about the mechanics of it, the physicality of it, but it's actually the will, right? It's about motivation, the determination, the sacrifice, the all things that, yes, eventually translate themselves in a physical dimension, but they're not. They would simply stay there if there was no spirit, no pneuma animating it, right? Put it in motion. So what we actually want, at least ideally, intentionally, is that at the end of this competition, whether with others or maybe also within ourselves, however, we can be certified an unequivocal outcome, right? To make it simple how hybrid this can be, think about, when you go learning, you take language classes. You're in a class with some people that you get to know. There are some you like, some you dislike, and then it's not a competition, right? There is a standard method of evaluation. There are those standards points. At the end of the classes, there is a test, and yes, it is about you getting that language certificate, but you're kind of pleased, let's be honest about it, just like at school. Who does get the best mark, right? And that's important for the same quality of the work, because competition is there is always a boundary between healthy and unhealthy competition, as in everything, right? But if we weren't trained to compete with others in our lives, if there was no confrontation, if it was not an actual struggle with other people, we would not be so active, so dynamic, so effective, so motivated, right? We are largely motivated by these impulses that are irrational, right? They are about what do you concretely need to prove to be better than someone else. That maybe one of your friends, or well, the truth is that we are designed to be kind of selfish at a point. And we need it for ourselves, because at the end of the day, the responsibility of continuing the species is up to us, and individually. And the better you get at the moment, and the more chances there are that you can do better afterwards. And this is part of the reason altogether. Then there can be enormous reason. This is just you getting a good mark. Just think about one country wanting to seize, I don't know, the natural resources of another one for interests that go to invest all society in politics. These are not just much larger things. It's not just a matter of scale, but it's important to stress how war is literally, by definition, as von Clausewitz says, nothing but a duel on a large scale. It's essentially it, right? In the essentials, it is. It's no metaphor. It's not just like it's exactly the thing. Still, however, defining this pentalogy, right, is at that point becomes enormously more complicated, because I don't know if you noticed, but states does not make wars because there is a fair play around. Yes, there are rules actually that we give ourselves internationally and so on, but the complexity of reality there by far surpasses whatever that this reason can be, and the responses can be, and everything is played at so many levels that it's no sport, it's not game. Right, it's realpolitik. It's wild. It's raw. It's brutal, and the earlier you realize how things are without idealism, but not even with this obsession for realism that sometimes even brings to the same excess of idealism, because everything ends in ism, as we always say, is not good. Right, and it's just a matter of intensity, but we all fall into that constantly. But at the same time, here we also should challenge our security. That is to say, are we sure really that what we're about to do, that can be something very demanding, something very, it's the same feeling you get exactly when you start a competition. You say that did I do well to dedicate my time and energies to this? Is it worth it? Is it not? I think we're all acquainted to such ideas, and it turns out most of the times that even bad experiences, or at least difficult ones, are fundamentally helping us to break our mental boundaries. That is, before we got into that, we had no idea, literally. And this is the process of growing up in a nutshell, right? It's literally expanding your mind, experiencing certain things that until you didn't see firsthand, you could not understand. So you can't fully realize at this point how war, but not just war, but even politics, or society, or history altogether, if you want to make a story of these things, is far from, let's say, our individual comprehension, given the limits that naturally there is for learning about all this, and how we very often trick ourselves into believing that we actually know something about it, and then when we're acquainted with its complexity, we realize we are just like a drop of water in the ocean in front of it, and that there is no way we could even learn a tiny bit of it in our studied with that our entire life. And this is literally what it is. If you think the broader amount of knowledge or information, no person can dominate it, but not even remotely. And not only, but thinking of information stored and already acquired that is always modifiable, by the way, but think about all the things we literally do not know yet, or that we haven't still focused on or put in perspective. The beauty of history in this sense is that since every person is different and has different perception and opinion and view on things, that we constantly actually create a new view, right? The problem is that reality does exist, and whether we understand it or not will make us face with it, and we'll have to find new tools, new methods, new capacities in order to cope with it, to understand with it, at least for as much as our goals are. This is basically what politics and war does it in the same way, right? It's not that we know how it will be, but tendentially we can get a better idea of it, but just being acquainted to it. And now we do not need to digress in this, because it's really about the philosophy of history. We discussed it at length in the von Krieger series, but it's still part of the same thing. It's still part of the cognitive problems that we have to learn about this all. So we have outlined basically what our idea of victory usually is, right? But certain problems arise, because when we study war, that is exactly the most pressuring moment of conflict that we can ever experience historically by average, because you can say that, of course, that war is what moves everything, right? But conflict is, in a way, and actually it is in a very deep existential way. In reality, we know war is just a moment in which all the forces are unleashed. I mean, all the forces. I mean, part of the forces, some of the most violent forces ever humans could unleash, are unleashed. And we have therefore to cope with a situation in which we know no pressure otherwise, right? With much greater changes can occur historically at a political or social level, but these are kind of more diluted, or at least they happen and we don't even realize they're happening, because just they happening, I don't know, on the market, on how people manage property or whatever. But war is pretty evident, right? If someone bombs your house, you're pretty damn concrete about the fact that you have to get the hell out of the way, before it happens, hopefully saving as much as you can from it. And that is something that puts you under a pressure that maybe, even the equivalent of that loss, that maybe, there's a major banking, financial crisis, you literally lose one house, its value, right? You say, well, you're to cope with that in a different way. It's the same outcome. In a way, yes, of course, there is an additional shock in war and all that you can imagine surrounding the thing, but that's exactly the point, that there are devastating forces at some point are concentrated just in one area, and that put the individual who has to cope with it, who has to understand the thing, in a condition that is unknown to any other experience. Or at least that is to be found historically in war on a regular base compared to other situations. So if we were to trace a pentalogy of war based on the one in a speculative way to the one we have traced now about games, competitions, sports, whatsoever, we can list the following analogous moments, right? The space in which we abstractly fit victory in war in these 5 points. Abstractly, because this is also what we tend to think warlike. To think warlike. This is not necessarily what war is in reality. And as we were saying before, as we've seen, as sports, games, competitions can be something that maybe people come to because of a lifetime of sacrifices that are dictated by who knows what in their experience, in that they do not conclude themselves in the game, but the game is the decisive moment. Can't think about the much greater complexity, of millions of people going at war and needing to think of victory in a certain way. So, speculatively, right, before we said that the contenders in games share a set of rules that will condition their actions. Well, in war, speculatively, here we could say that the decision on a conflict and its objectives marks the same thing. That is to say, you're about to launch yourself in this military enterprise, and you do not have actually rules going on, right? There's not a situation where someone decides there's an authority that says, okay, now we'll play this game, because war is a game, technically. Even von Clausewitz says it. Actually, it's he says that the closest thing goes it's to a card game, given the. Of course, this is a metaphor, but he meant there something specific about the Clausewitzian triad and the idea of randomness of the human factors, the all aspects that makes you see how it's not that you can ever win a card game all the time, right? There is always an aspect of it that you will never be able to dominate. There's always your intervention. But there are also rules in a way, right? And these rules, as we can call them this way, are the ones we study in the theory of the art of war. That is to say, it's not that war has to respond to our expectations, because otherwise we would even need to fight it if we could control it. But we can study what war is and how it tendentially works. So when we start a war, we tendentially first of all decide to do so, right? Even when we're actually attacked first and we would have not liked the thing to have happened, because you have to actually decide to give a response or not. And this decision is naturally matured over a conflict that can have already escalated militarily speaking, but it can be just you having to make it escalate at the moment. It's still being, not military. Also, in this regard, you start to think, and automatically you define the objectives. That is to say, that there is nobody, right? I can't think even of a clinical situation in which a person simply needs to be violent without cognitively, having not just a reason, but defining specifically the target of the aggression. Right, so while in games we have rules that will hopefully condition our actions, in war we have, that are meant to condition our actions. In war we just have our decision to participate in it, and its objectives. Right, the idea is, do we fight? And if we do, what the hell do we do? What the hell do we want to achieve? Because that is what, it's victory, yes, but what is victory then, concretely? What is that you want to get at that point? It's that objective that defines everything. This is what we said pretty clearly last time, that is to say, victory exists, right, and can be achieved only if you actually believe in it, if you actually have that political and cultural understanding of what, of the object you want to achieve, and at that point it's enough, because maybe you still can fail, but it's the motive. If you know what you're fighting for, you're gonna pursue it, and it's not easy, right? Because as we will see now, things change during war itself, so it's very complicated. This is why these 5 points are actually just about the idea of war, and about the idea of victory in war. Then 2. Second point, we said before for games that competitors in the competition are defined. So we know who they are individually. It's just them. By rule, there can't be another. If they intervene, the game is suspended. Something, So in war, victory has to contemplate the preparation of the military instrument. That is to say, yes, you can decide to go at war, and you can decide what you want, right? These are all things you can do just by thinking about. And the problem is that you need, in war, a military instrument to use. You have to deliver violence in a way or another. Otherwise, you cannot achieve your objectives, right? So your military instrument must be prepared for it, which doesn't mean it has to be fully fit for it, because you never know what it must work, must function, and that's also why we have, permanent armed forces, and in civilization we develop it like that. And also you have to be consistent about their use, right? That you must know how these work, and in order for you to command them and to actually attain those objects. Then, as we've seen in games, there's this credits accruing phase. You get points, scores. Well, in war, you have battles, right? And victory is achieved through a series of battles. Here, let's not digress on the concept of, decisiveness that we discussed pretty clearly in the From Kriege series. But fundamentally, there can't be any war without a fight at that point. It could technically, you could start war at one point, and the next second, the enemy says, we surrender, so you maybe have not delivered that, but at least in terms of violence, but at least in terms of deterrence, you must be up to fight. And that's basically it. Then, we have the end of the competition, right, in games, so that this sum of credits bring us to what is, by rule, the victory. In war, the thing is much more complicated, because you do not actually know, from a formal point of view, when victory has been achieved, or, let's say better, you can't even define what your objective is, but you will never fully reach it. You could even surpass it, right? Think about the Romans during the Second Punic War. The conservative side didn't even want to step out of Italy, right? They would have had then not just a third, but a fourth, a fifth Punic War had that happen, right? So that tells you also about the complexity of the political, the decisional process in policy. It's another thing now. But the question is, what is that you actually wanted to achieve, right? Is in war what you got at the end, what you really wanted, right? Even just through the fact that you fought, that is to say, think about your armed forces and all how this, their fitness influenced the politics in society. Yes, you may have found the right objective and the best way to achieve it, but this still doesn't mean that it has been worth it or not. As we know, you can't formally achieve a victory that basically will make you lose the whole thing, right? Because it's been too expensive, and the cost-benefits ratio was not worth it. So, at a certain point, there is victory, which mostly, in the Clausewitzian definition, is you compel the enemy to fulfill your will. And how vague it is, but not because the definition is wrong, but because it's exactly what it is, under any scientific, historical point of view. That's it. That it is what you are content with, and what basically the other one is maybe, is still content, but not in the way he had wished to be. That is to say, okay, well, we will stop fighting at that point, right? And you understand how the same, the fourth point should be exactly in games the one that it cannot be confuted in any way, because you say, the guy got that amount of points, the other guy got less, so the first guy wins. Because of that, it's certain, it's fine. In war, fundamentally, it's not like it, because everybody will have a different view of this, and we will see now much better, what it practically means. So, then there is the fifth point, right? In games and sports, there is the public certification through the awarding of a prize. In war, this is also more difficult to realize. It should be the achievement of the purposes of the conflict. That is, what the hell did you want, right? This may be actually clearer, right? What we said before about victory is because it's something much more flexible to to reach or not reach, because you never know whether, for example, the conflict can go on, but at least you can still have a conflict going on, or at least if you fought for something specific, that is, you may have resentment towards someone, but the reason for that resentment is a specific thing that happened that you want to stop. Well, if your objective was to make the thing stop and you achieved it, right, you won substantially. This already makes you understand, first of all, how subjective that is, because it's fundamentally to you. To the person may not be the problem, because maybe the person didn't give a damn about the thing as much as you did, so you maybe have struggled much more. Maybe that's where it was not worth it, but at least at that point, it's easier to recognize whether what you wanted to achieve was accomplished. And this is important historically speaking. In fact, it's much easier to do. There are countries that fight for something that can be historically ascertained. That is, this can be observed even just through, I don't know, think about the various agreements between the allies before the war and all this stuff, and then you can effectively measure at the end of the war whether those concrete results have been achieved. Then what will have happened in the meanwhile, whether it had been worth it or not, it is much more complicated to assess. And also, this has nothing to do whether the achievement of the purposes will put the conflict out, right? And that's also where you should start seriously wondering what are the boundaries of that environment. That is what we will see now make the thing even more complicated, because not always in war we are actually fighting. Actually, never in war we're fighting in a vacuum where you have just you and your enemy. You live in a world with lots of other people, and whatever you do is gonna have a dramatic influence, especially when you actually go out to kill your enemy. That is something that does have an impact, always internationally speaking. So what we're doing here, what we were remembering about last time in concrete terms, is that we find here all the perplexities that Guicciardini expressed in the 16th century. Why? Well, because fundamentally we are unable to draw such precise lines of demarcation between each of these passages that we have just read about the meaning of a victory in war, right? Nor to establish deterministic links of causality or precise juxtapositions and concatenations between them. And not even to identify on victory, whatever it's been achieved like, that root of semantic consensus among, not even actually, among the contenders themselves at the base of the competitive events. That is to say, we all have our own narrative of how the thing occurred and why we do that. I don't know if you ever follow videos of criminal psychology, but you realize in there is that, yeah, of course there are rules there, because there you have the interrogations, you have the police that sets the rule, right? Just like law provides them and the authority enforces it, right? But what you have is versions of the story. It is to say, why did you shoot that person? Well, we can all see there how sophisticated law is in actually describing what the thing is. It's a bit like history, right? In history, we do the same thing. We all inquire in the same fashion. Actually, detectives are fundamentally historians in that regard, because they must know exactly what happened, right? The question, though, is in a world where there are no rules of that kind over states altogether, or even when there are, let's say, eventually the consequences of those actions are going to be much less containable, right? Internationally, politically, at so many levels, right? The question gets difficult to say, let's simply say it in this way. Just think about a thug, right? It can't be an equivalent of a warrior in ancient times that, steals and robs and kills and rape and whatever. I think we all have an idea of what civilized, being a civilized person ideally means, right? But there are people, if they were actually raised in that context, well, you just pick them and put them in jail. But the question is that for them, in their minds, at a certain point, yes, I do believe in the universal values of human nature and so on. So that I think there is always something that can go beyond. But at least I personally, even studying history in that regard, I'm absolutely not surprised, and we cannot be surprised that there are people that evaluate what all those things are worth. Like, do you think that there is a consensus on Earth on what a human life costs? Right? We can ideally say, okay, well, we decide that at a certain point, human life is priceless, right? That is so precious potentially, right, for the accomplishments that eventually will fall short in our lifetime, that we have to protect it more than anything else. And that's a beautiful idea, right? It's actually also what I fundamentally believe in, but I realize it's very ideal. Then if you study history, you see that this is absolutely not true, because not only people kill each other, but specifically they give a price, a very specific price, just like anything else on the market, to human life. And we do all have a price on this earth. This is the truth, right? On this earth, this is true, right? You can, it's ugly to say, but just a person that is born and raised in a third world country where has obviously a lower price on the market of the world than a person lived in the first world. This is not a judgment. It's literally how all from politics to economic shows, right? Let's be honest, most people do not give a damn about people's lives. And that's exactly what it means to give a prize, because you neglect that, and so if something happens to it, it doesn't give a damn. That also tells you how important individual responsibility is, because your choice in that matter is not just, intervening or and causing something that if you don't intervene into it, nothing happens. No, if you don't intervene into it, you actually let people die, let genocide happening, and all this stuff. And surprise, surprise, nobody cares. Most people do not even know. Right? Let's be honest, most people do not, by far, absolutely know anything about even the history of their own country. You can't imagine what, you can't be about the rest of the world. Right? So, sad and bitter as it sounds, this is the reality we live in. And it's exactly because of this reason that, stubbornly and hysterically shouting at, we just have to enforce this right. You do not even know how to enforce these rights, because you have not the palest idea of what politics or war is, and maybe have even pacifistic ideas for which you should neither use violence. The question is, what are you concretely solving? What do you think you will actually achieve? That is not to say that moral, that the ideals are worthless. That is actually all what moves us at the end of the day. That's the prevalence of moral forces we're talking about before. But those things serve for us to act in a world, in a hardware world, right? That will not obey to us unless we make a dramatic effort, and we will put it in front of terrible choices, of compromises, of, killing a certain amount of people to save actually a greater amount of them. We're placed in international policy where we're faced constantly with this, right? At the point that we even get desensitized. I mean, even, heads of states are actually meant to be like that, because they have to be extremely pragmatic about what is going to happen or not. And the problem in this that I would like to stress is that each and every one of us has their own subjective view of the thing, right? And that's why the pentalogy we made before is so inconsistent when we're, if not from a theoretical point of view, we're going to measure exactly how the thing should happen. Because this would be difficult even if it was just about ourselves as individuals, if we really had an absolute power to move reality all just the way we wanted, you can imagine what this is actually in reality instead, and when it encompasses societies of millions, of hundreds of millions, of billions, you think of the world. Now, you think that this is maybe just talk, that it doesn't solve the problem itself, but actually just having a clarity of vision on these issues is the first step you can make to clarify exactly your objectives, to to define better your decisions, to prepare for war the way it is, to know how to fight it, to know what to reach as a compromise, very often as a negotiation, because as we know, war is just a political instrument. So this is not about just being military suspended in the universe somewhere, doing some cosmical fight against an analogous entity. This is literally about realizing everything we do passes from the slightest thing we can even think for a moment. As I often say, even what you pick in a supermarket actually makes the difference. Between those things, you're not cut out of it, right? This is the unfortunate, hypocritical ideal that has been widespread too much in our Western world. I mean, the idea that there is a good and bad, and that if you decide just to be from one of the two sides, you are it, and you don't have to answer anybody, and then therefore you can, wash your hands and thinking that it's all about that. That's literally the best way to become the bad guy. And for you, without even knowing it, that is even worse, because basically you will perpetuate this over and over again. It will fall short of expectations here. None of us actually makes what we could do. But it's exactly this realization, that there is a maximum we can achieve, and that it's still a big deal to make a difference along the line, should be the first motivation of doing more about that. Also because it reflects constantly on us, right? It's not that if they kill 10,000 people in Central Africa, your life is not influenced by it. Yes, it can be virtually insignificant at some point, given that, of course, you're much more directly impacted by lots of other things, but the question is that they're much closer to you, right? It's like we were saying before, when the thing concentrates on you, if a dear person is lost to you, with it's not you're thinking just about all the criminal acts that are happening all over the world. Let's be honest about it. We mostly don't give a damn, especially at that point. But that's exactly how flexible our our evaluation of reality is, and that's what should make us think quite seriously about whether we're doing well or not. Moreover, when we speak of war, there is a double process in here, because whatever we do or we think is mirrored by the opponent according to his own logic and subject to the effects of reciprocal influences, and therefore is interpreted along its entire range of expressions. What does it mean? These are the laws of reciprocity, according to von Clausewitz. You're not fighting alone, right? Even if you were fighting, just struggling with yourself, there is still an outer world you have to cope with in this regard, and there is an inherent conflict in any human relation, right? Human relations without conflict do not exist. Language is violent always, right? Making a speech is always wrestling with someone. Always, right? There is just a point up to which it's an offense, it can be persecuted, but the question is that we live in a world of standards, right, for which, if you poke a person in the street, is that aggression? How can you define that, right? There is at a certain point a negotiation, a pragmatic realization that was an aggression, wasn't. Because of what? Because of practical reasons. Just what a person may be disturbed, you poke them in the street, but the question is, what are they going to do about it? They're in the street presumably going somewhere because they need to, and you poked them and you said, where's this imbecile? But then that's pretty much it. There is no serious damage, there's no, but it's still an aggression if you want, because the person got bothered by it. So where do you trace the line? Well, we trace these lines constantly in our own lives, right? There's not a policeman behind every corner, and there is not a state controlling everything. This is also very important to realize that things that happen, most of the times happen because of individual responsibility. There is not the evil tyrant that causes the worst things in the world. There is millions of people that back tyrants and that become tyrants themselves and can do horrible stuff. That's the reality of the story. You're no angel. You're no saint, right? You're no perfect, pure creature. We're all evil as we can be, as humans can be. We're all good as we can be, as humans can be. But what makes the difference is what we actually do, and what decisional process and definition of our objectives is involved in the process. And that's exactly what the same war is, because war is conflict altogether. And then war is fundamentally violence, which is what makes the difference between the two things, between conflict and war. Always remember the fundamental difference between them. But the conflict is always there, and the violent option is always there as well. It's on the table at all times, because we're designed to be like that, genetically speaking. So this idea that everything we do is mirrored by the enemy, in a way, is also fundamental to the historical narrative of war, of victory and defeat. Because, as we said before, what victory or defeat is becomes highly subjective. Therefore, there can be different narratives about what happened, simply also because the achievement of the purposes of the war or of the conflict it has a different value for the contendants. Right? There's never been a war where what was at stake was equal for both sides. It was always different. And it changed also during time. Sometimes the importance maybe switched, right? In relative terms. So that's why, for example, so I would actually like to tell you, just like in the other video, that historical narratives cannot. This is not an excuse to flip things, to put things in relativistic terms. Right, we know scientifically, historically, certain things pretty damn well. Yes, sometimes it's just an illusion of that knowledge, but still, you can recognize how accurate something is compared to, for example, another narrative that does not exist, and that therefore may be even better than yours, but somebody didn't struggle to tell, and that even has a political and strategical impact, right? And that's why, for example, fake news are so important, or why, in fact, even the triumph of mediocrity is a weapon at that point, because it does impact. It takes away space from the decisional process. People deserve actually to say something better, and it doesn't occur. It's really literally exploited internationally speaking, right? But especially there could be the paradox, which you say, that war we won it, right? And the other guy, the enemy, is saying we won it instead. Right, it's plenty of this stuff historically speaking. It's full of different points of view, right? And actually, it's very easy to reason like that. You know why? Because it's the fifth point of the pentalogy. It's not about the fourth. It's the one defining, giving credits, giving points, scores, and calculating victory. It's simply the formal realization that, yes, a war may have been won or lost, but the important there is not namely how many wars you formally won, but what was the actual effect of it. It's like when you see stupid kids on YouTube comments that make the list of how many victory that country got. It's literally one of the most idiotic thing you can talk about, because it doesn't mean utterly anything. Right, it's not that those formal victories or defeats do not have an importance, but in the historical context in which they happened altogether, they're not comparable. They would require a thorough understanding of what that was in the first place, and you can have an enormous power that is hegemonic and that gets defeated by a small one that was struggling for survival. But then, yes, that smaller power got a victory. But the question is, what did the bigger hegemonic power care about at the end of the day? What did it change, right? Maybe that small power had half of its population annihilated and all the hatred and sufferings and disruption and poverty and whatever. Yes, they might have achieved something was worth it, because generally speaking, that's how it happens. But they suffered as hell. And maybe the communities of the bigger power would not even scratch at people. They didn't even give a damn with the reasons why they did it. And this is rough, because this tells you also how much what the majority, I mean, the majority of at least the people who own the majority of the strength of a political entity may actually be oblivious about what other people think. And this can be seen in policy every day, right? Why are there all these narratives of saying, that country is backward, so who cares about it? I hope they die because they're, I don't even care about them. Who the hell cares if they starve to death, right? I'm fat, I'm rich, I'm fine with that, and I don't give a damn. How many people do reason like this? Actually, a lot of them, right? It's a bit like what we were saying before. But it's even worse. Like, it's even fabricating narratives that say, I don't know, that people is inferior, or they're just a bunch of thieves, or assassins, or criminals, and I'm the pure one. Right, it's not them that maybe might have pretty serious problems that we could solve together in a constructive way for me even to profit from it. No, it's just they are like kind of an inferior people. It's full of people who reason like that. I mean, in most countries, I presume actually that the average person does reason in those terms. That is, shutting your eyes, ears, and pretending that reality does not exist. Why? Because you have to feel individually better. And turns out most of the cases why this happens is that you do not feel well at all with yourself, and you pretty damn well know it, even if you didn't want to accept it. And that's why you invent a parallel reality that can be even the narrative of, everything's fine, right? It's the same mentality that people in dictatorships have. Oh yes, well, I realize maybe here the things go not so well, but we have to make this last effort that our leader promised us, and everything will be happy then, right? And this is the typical psychology. This is typical mindset, right? It's just, another typical thing is saying, nobody can ever know, right? Politicians are all corrupted, we can't say whether it's right or wrong, who cares? And that's very often exploited by regimes to actually do whatever the heck they like, because even if people recognize they're kind of weak, they do not have other terms of comparison with, more advanced, freer places where people actually live better, so that they're not even supposed to compare them. This still happens in countries, for example, that were under dictatorship for a long time. Maybe today they do better, but not completely free country, but maybe they're a bit authoritative regimes. But as free people, they maintain the idea as a community, as a society, that still they are their own thing, right? That the rest of the world is dangerous, that everybody has also developing this sense of of aggression from the other side, that everybody hates you because you're this special, poor, dear, tender people that never harmed anyone, that was always pure and free, and all the others are wicked. How is this proper of so many propagandas all over the world? In the same way, in the same identical way, right? You can do this with people that haven't the slightest idea, of course, nor what their country has ever been by any standard, but also naturally what the rest of the world has ever been by any standard. And that's where you can fabricate things, proper judgments. They're wrong, they're false, but that everybody buys, right? Conspiracy theories, right? It's very easy. And the interesting aspect of this is that this is all built on, not just at the moment, but it's also the consequence of a historical, it's the product of a historical path, of a settling, of a accumulation of ideas, of prejudices. Why do you think, I don't know, that there was a Holocaust in the 1940s? because Hitler invented anti-Semitism or the nation state invented anti-Semitism. These are things that date back in the millennia of deep hatred, discrimination, oppression, all kind of violence that nobody ever punished, nobody ever disciplined, right? And actually the elites tended actually to stop because they realized probably how stupid it was, but the masses didn't. And that's what the thing works like. Dictatorships works thanks to the masses. It's the masses who are, on average, stupid, uneducated, incapable of making a dramatic change from a moment to another. They are also, however, the best ones you can, at that point, help if you had the means to actually educate them to do the greatest difference. And that's where the dictatorship will keep you away from doing it. And it's extremely disturbing how much such ideas are interiorized in the conscience of a people. Right? When I was younger, I honestly believed, that after having debunked, nationalistic, delirium, and this kind of monolithic fanatism, that after all, there is no, that the past doesn't matter, that the identity doesn't matter, that this is absolutely wrong, too, as well, right? It is not to say nationalism is right, but the question is that truly, like a people that for centuries and centuries has always felt like that, and doesn't undergo a, substantial social change over time, will keep thinking that, because the whole social structures and mentality has interiorized that idea and will not abandon it, right? That even when they're confronted with reality, that there is this thing of cognitive dissonance that will make them say, but it's not true still. Right? These are very similar psychological mechanisms that also, abusers actually dealt people with serious prepotent psychological issues that try to convince themselves and others of the righteousness of their ideas to commit some of the most unspeakable crimes. And they have a dialectic in there that they use exactly to calm themselves, to make them pretend everything is fine, that they do not have to worry. Right? We should all be very seriously worried, because when you stop worrying, you stop coping with reality, and you're going to be overwhelmed by it. It's the same reason why we bump the hell out of them at a certain point, and the innocents died with them. Right? Because you cannot accuse a newborn baby to have had anything to do with that, but still, in order to stop that madness, war, unfortunately, in terms of collateral damage, causes that as well. But we begin to be responsible since about these things since a very early age, and that's where actually most of the damage is also done, because it's very difficult, very, very difficult to make a person change the mindset that matured during its childhood and adolescence. The question here is also, as noted above, that all this pentalogy gets down to focus mostly on how to win. Right? We mostly skip the process of saying, okay, but what we have, is what we want to achieve worth it? No, it's just how do we make it win? It's almost a mechanicistic idea. It's getting sure about what we have to do to feel entitled, to feel on track, and say, okay, just now we know what to do. Yes, we perfectly know what to do. We're fine. Now we can just calculate how to do it. That's not a good way of dealing with the thing, because planning, and it requires, first of all, if you want to make a good plan, you also have to have a good objective. And you can't simply think that war will be won, right? Thinking of the military instrument and on battles which must be engaged. This is not enough. Think about the Schlieffen Plan, that not just failed, but also didn't contemplate any other solution. So that basically Europe remained at war for 4 years, knowing that the thing was over since the beginning, but simply because they had completely screwed up at a decisional process. And they had the possibility of stopping it all along, but they wouldn't. That's the cognitive dissonance, right? And it's actually more than that, because of course that was an entire regime, an entire components, and exactly the determinate one that had failed at that point and couldn't not recognize it. Also, at a certain point of view, from a certain point of view, concretely, because I don't know, they feared, as it would happen, it could be a Bolshevik revolution, and things could even go worse. Right? So there is no easy way out of this, right? But that's why you should think very carefully about whatever you do before doing it. Always. Because that's what's really going to make the difference most of the cases. How to do it can be useful, but it's not the same thing. That's what you can have, I don't know, an artisan or a clerk or a professional who is perfect at his job, but as an individual is a simple idiot that cannot understand even the most elementary morality. But this has always been there, right? That's exactly how also certain ideas were perpetrated. Never think that being an educated person or intelligent person actually means to make the right choices. So complexity increases naturally the difficulty of the solution. Right? Don't think that knowing more, once again, is necessarily to be more capable. Then you require the effort in order to achieve it. And war, in this sense, we could say, teaches a lot. It creates a vaccine against itself, in a sense. Not always successfully, but it's obvious there must be certain specific conditions. I don't know, think about after World War II, even political unity in that regard, the fact that the United States basically dominated the Western world, that they owned 1/3 of the 2/3 of actually the world's wealth. There was a in there was a capacity even from the single governments, etc., to achieve a lot. On the longer, with all the differences, especially just after the war, the U.S. had a hell of a leadership in a way, in spite of all the mistakes that existed at the same time. But that helped to actually prevent what had happened fundamentally after World War I, where the idea that they hadn't understand much, that they just didn't, that the moral of the story was not to intervene in anybody's business. Yeah, that's exactly how Nazism, fascism, communism, communism at least was fought even after World War I. But think about the expeditions in Siberia and all this, and all this stuff, but from a free world. But the question there was also simply all fragmented, all on their own, and that's freedom, and that's order. No. Unfortunately, history teaches us that letting people free to do whatever they want is not a good recipe at all to make things work well. Right? You can't oppress them either. There is a balance even in here. But a question of giving a person that doesn't have a skill, a capacity, the sense of entitlement to let them think they can't make it alone is not a good recipe. It's actually a step backwards in the history of civilization. It's simply not realizing that freedom works exactly to let us understand how we're stronger when we work together in a more complex system. That's the entire history of civilization. Absolute freedom is negative freedom, right? It's liberty what we mostly seek, right? Absolute freedom is exactly what any criminal wants, for example. Because who are you to stop me to do whatever I want? Well, yeah, right? And before you actually expose other freemen to the craziness of these individuals, well, there could be moves you could make as a society to prevent this from even happening, right? And then you have surely to be very, very, very careful about how far you go with that, because you may really oppress then free people at the same time. But on this fact that objectively the pentalogy we listed before about war, about victory in war, is not enough, we think of this other pentalogy in parallel, in synopsis. So, first of all, for the point one, for the parties to enter into conflict, it is not necessary that they contend for the same single golden apple, right? That's what we were saying before. The objective of war can be seen differently from different people, right? So you can't pretend that you start a war for the same reasons, speculatively, that your enemy has. It never happens. It's easy to know because it's real. It never happened historically. There's never been anything like that. There can't be. For physical reasons. It's nothing even to do with humans. Like true perfection, to splitting things in two, does not exist in the physical world. We cannot achieve that. Right? There's no thing like equality in the physical world, by definition. 2. The possession of a military instrument of any, so we're talking about armed forces, military, of any nature and size, is irrelevant to the possibility of being involved in a conflict, right? Yes, it's literally irrelevant, because you may actually be the greatest power on earth, but the question is that if something gets messed up from a political point of view or social point of view, the military will simply follow it, right? That's how conflicts emerge, and the fact, we're speaking of conflict specifically, right? And consequently also in a war, less frequently, so that of course a war at that point, as long as your military instrument is fit, right? It's not that people are eager to go at war with the United States today, in today's time, are they? There is a specific reason, and thankfully the United States do not kid about this. And the question here is just be careful, because the idea that something remains always the same is anti-historical, right? And we know of some of the greatest militaries out there that simply couldn't even win the war, right? Let's speak of World War II. So no country in the world, not even one, and not even remotely, at the beginning in 1939, was ready for war, right? The Germans were the only ones who could mount up, of course, after having conquered the rest of Europe using the French and the Italian labor force, the Axis manpower and so on, could launch, for example, they were the only ones who could, in terms of doctrine, launch something like the invasion of the Soviet Union. The only ones. They were the best military out there in the world, no doubt. You know how it's gone, right? So, you want to say it from the Soviet side, well, the possession of the military instrument of any nature inside is irrelevant, literally, to the possibility of being involved in a conflict. In that case, the Nazis simply miscalculated the sheer numbers of Soviet divisions were there. It's not that the Soviets were faring well, especially after Stalin's purges, and all the they at least had gained some experience, some understanding of certain aspects during the war with Finland. But the question there is that if you had to make a strategical analysis of the time, nobody had the idea of how things would end, because guess, surprise, surprise, history is not deterministically prescriptable, right? And it doesn't matter what military you have. You will be involved in wars, and you'll have to cope with that, right? Maybe this example wasn't the best one this term, but the question of saying, I don't know, I just entrench myself in my own country, I will transform my army into a bulldozer that will tear down everything comes in. At this point, it's never existed historically, never functioned, right? It could have been a good strategy, in some cases, but the question is that it's not about the military, it's about the politics, the society of it. If there were reasons for that to change, they would change, right? And especially today, nobody can do that. There's no military in the world that can work at this point with the standards it has without constant connection with global market. And of course, they would be able to fight a war in that sense, but they would have to change the way they are, and they would have serious problems and would have to readapt. And the way this will happen is not entirely clear, because until you know what will happen, who will be the enemy, right? These things are studied all over, right? More or less countries are armed in function of what the broader international policy will let them think orientatively things could turn like, right? But how the things will turn like, that nobody knows, right? We mostly have a decent idea, like at a four months distance. Then beyond that, it's just orientatively. But naturally, the more distant we go in time, the least we would never know. We would think actually there would be a pandemic like this, right? We actually knew. I mean, epidemiologists knew. We knew everything about it. What it would have been about, the type of it, where it would have spread, how that there would have been. We all knew. We knew everything. Our scientific community is freaking amazing, but of course the rest of the world didn't give a damn, because that's how mostly we are set, right? In these matters. So you can imagine how complicated a war is to not just to predict, but even to think whether how will be fought, and everything will change in the meanwhile it's being fought at the same time. Third point, remember what we said about who does participate and which kind of engagement there's going to be. Well, the battlefield, unlike video games, is not closed, right? It's not a basketball field. It's not just it has a fence around that nobody will enter in, right? We live in the world. Also, the number and type of battles are not determined. You don't know how much you will have to fight. You do not know it, and everything will be decided battle after battle, right? So these are kind of things that. That's also why you wonder why geopolitics does not exist, because exactly we do not have the slightest idea of what may happen concretely. And most wars that actually happen today, they might have been actively caused, consciously produced, but the majority of them were not predictable. Right? They couldn't be predicted. Things might have gone very differently. Even had just some political events we don't even maybe give a damn about, we already forgotten, had not happened. That's why also historians are needed to find out why certain things happen. Fourth point, only exceptionally victory is a recognizable point-like moment of definitive turning point in the fate of a conflict. We're speaking of conflict, not a war. Be careful, right? Victory, as we've seen here, goes even beyond as a political and cultural construct of the actual end of hostility. That of war, actually, not to be just not to be equivocal, but at that point you may have not reached what you wanted. That is there is an objective that you wanted to achieve. Did you achieve it? No. But was it necessarily bad? Maybe you still won practically, because maybe you wiped out the guy in the process. So whoever wanted to stop you vanished. But the question is still that for some reason you do not. Maybe your reason why you were fighting disappeared in the meanwhile, for reasons that maybe had nothing to do with that specific war you were fighting. Right, and yes, these things do happen much more frequently than they seem. And we have no idea in a conflict whether we can put the word end to it. Remember the winged Nika that flies away even when delivers as a messenger the victory proper from gods. That's the exact point. You may win a war, but still the conflict is not over. And next time you may not be as successful. So, fifth point, the achievement of the aims of the conflict is often only partial, conditional, and a harbinger of new conflicts in turn. How often does it happen? Right? Look at Iraq. Right? This is something that you cannot really, that things that you make at the moment make a difference for. We could not foretell clearly what would have happened, and sometimes there's also this sense of defeatism, like saying, "Oh, since we screwed up, we should have not done it in the first place." That's wrong too. That's also one of the worst mistakes you can do, because at some point, because you may still be in time to fix things, and you don't, and you don't understand even the mistake you did, because sometimes that mistake could have been avoided not by not fighting the war, but simply fighting it better with a greater understanding, greater preparation, planning, whatever, right? So behaving like a child, saying, I try, I fail, so I will not try anymore. That's not growing up, right? That speaks of low moral resources, of an incapacity to read through the complexity of the world you live in. That's not a symptom of maturity, right? There is these are narratives that unfortunately have impacted entire countries. That war should have never been fought. Why? Because it was a war? Because they told you that wars are bad? Always. Because you think that wars are fought for stupid reasons, because you think that it's just about the fat rich guys that sent to die the poor innocent people, because you think that, I don't know, that there are the good guys and the bad guys, because you're frustrated maybe at yourself, you need to vent with others, saying that we're bastards. You don't even know what that war was about, because you think that the sacrifice for those who fought in that war for their own country or for whatever they believed in, it doesn't mean anything for you that have never even fought in there. And don't think that the others are justified, right? Don't think that, even just being part of a group, or even part of the military you fought that means actually to be righteous in anyone. No, you're an individual. You're there on your own, right? Our societies are artificial. We create them as humans to function better, and that's where our responsibility is required. So to cut this sharply as if, there's always the easy reason, the good, the one everybody can understand, the smart guy, right, and the others are kind of stupid. Doesn't work like that. Sorry. And I can't like, you see, if you're not a strategical analyst, like I am not, for example, it's not that I can't, you can offer valid explanations for everything. You have to study the thing for freaking lot of years before you can come up with something intelligent about it. Right? So, some of you say, Schwerpunkt, you know so much and all this thing. Yeah, I know things because I had enough time to to read a lot, maybe, and to disclose, but, this is not even scratching the surface of anything, right? I can't tell you. I realize these things because they're important. I want to share with you the whole thing, but the difficulty in actually understanding the concrete examples we're talking about, that is something that only a specialist can do, right? So be aware of that, which doesn't even mean to blindly follow the specialist on that ground, because very often specialists are wrong as well. It's never about feeling secure, right? You the only thing you have to feel secure is your capacity to deal with the world. And in order to have that security, you have to have understood something of the world. It is true. It is true. But that understanding will tell you that you will never know enough, and that's exactly what will keep you awake. Sleeping on someone who tells you, this is how it went, sleep well, because, I told you the truth, that is just perpetuating your own insecurity. And that's what we want to get rid of here, completely. Because it's just bad advice. It doesn't work for anybody. It's just bad. And as humans, we all work like that. So, it's pretty good advice. So, could we give a definition of victory and getting to the tetralogy finally? Well, yes, because we could say that victory is the universal recognition, which means comprehensive, shared one, that one of the parties in the conflict has substantially and irreversibly, and you understand how approximate the definition is, though, shifted the balance of forces to its own advantage, to the extent that it allows it to achieve the uncontested and stable political goals of the conflict over time. This is very important because you realize that there is, when we speak that this balance of forces is being substantially and irreversibly shifted, we know that substantially, what does it mean? It means that it has enough concreteness fundamentally to be recognized, but yeah, what's their concreteness? Like, you have to calculate it. Irreversibly is irreversibly up to a certain point, right? Because, as we've said, everything can change. But still at the point that is universally recognized, right? It is to say, there's just nothing these guys could do anymore. They've exhausted their resources. They're done. Right? Maybe over time, with generations, etc., the thing will change. And this is exactly what also makes the thing. How many peoples have been defeated, but they rose up once again and defeated maybe the enemy that had curbed them. Right? And that's where the idea of the stability of political goals over time plays an important role when thinking of the conflict. Right? And that's time, having patience, realizing that certain things will be understood, tested, recognized just over a certain amount of time, things to settle in a certain way and see if they were stable enough. Only time can tell. Only time can tell. And if we are concerned legitimately for the future, we should be very happy about the fact that we have an enormous amount of past to compare with the likelihood and the possibility of how much one of these political results can be stable over time. And that's where we can judge something that has happened. And at the end of the day, it's not that we are interested in the future as much we are in the past, because one thing is planning, yes, but at the same time, we plan on things that we already know, that have become already past in the moment we learned them. So at the end of the day, it's always studying history that makes the thing done, right? Getting to the tetralogy proper, we can define victory like this. So, in 4 points. 1. Victory is a political and cultural construct. This is what we got to also in the other video about the uncertainty of victory. Victory is a political and cultural construct. That is to say, it is defined by politics and culture. Victory is defined by the winner. Yes, those are the guys who get it, fundamentally, and they have struggled for it. Not necessarily more than those who are defeated, but the importance of this concept is that the victory must be intelligible by the victor's opponent to the point of entering his political and cultural processes as a defeat and to be metabolized as such. That is to say, even if you actually crush one people in battle or in war, and that people will keep believing that they have not been defeated and will keep fighting against you till, who knows when. We will literally eradicate them from the face of the earth. Well, can you speak of victory? Honestly. Evidently, it becomes difficult. Right? In order to win someone, you have to make him internalize his defeat. which is a big deal, right? You have literally to destroy this person's resistance, right? And it can be, I mean, as we've seen, this substantiates itself into the shift of the balance of force, which doesn't necessarily mean that a defeated is just a broken person at that point. But surely the reasons why we fight and we unleash violence also are pretty serious enough to, say, stand against enough resistance from a side of a person that if at a point gives up, has really suffered something. It will keep suffering. That is also something very important to understand. And we will see it better when we'll speak of defeat substantially. And it's much darker and more dangerous than it sounds, right? That's where the illusion of victory can be really a real problem, right? Because there are certain cultures or civilizations, countries, peoples, whatever, that they convince themselves of their own superiority. That's very often when they really weaken themselves, when they lose the capacity to actually cope with reality. You think that, yeah, we'll always make it, and then they won't, right? There are so many examples at this point I don't even need to make. 2. Victory must promote a structural imbalance to the advantage of the winner, right? Because this is a necessary element of its political nature. This is where you can substantiate perhaps best what a victory has been, right? What did you want, right? This can naturally shrink in importance depending on, as we've seen before, how important it is subjectively for the two contenders, respectively. You may achieve a clamorous victory, given your objectives, but still, for someone else, maybe nothing. Right? It's like learning to do something very stupid and being, happy or satisfied, but you realize that won't solve your life's problems, will it? Right? And that's exactly why and how we I don't know, we can't even settle that matter saying, I'm proud of myself to reward ourselves, but the question is still, but what did you actually get? Right, so it's obvious in here, and this is also Clausewitsian concept, that the bigger the effort is, the more there is at stake. Well, then the more serious things happen. And it's pretty obvious that, destroying a country in a war is part of one of those things. That's a pretty big thing, right? And it must have been caused by very serious reasons, not stupid ones, as, people sometimes think, war is just a mistake. No. If war is a mistake, also, politics is a mistake, society is a mistake. War can be more, perhaps, in considering the incidents of it in the history of mankind, and the, reflecting in part definitely the idea of you want to solve things of hastiness, right? Of the idea that it's the quickest solution. Then most of the times, yes, it's not a good idea, but also most of the times humans do not solve their problems through violence, do they? Right. So the time war is fought, actually, there is a serious enough reason to stop listening to it, rather than blaming about things you don't even understand. Because we all have prejudices and problems with understanding, and it's not by expressing these judgments that things will become better for us, that we will become more skilled, right? You can't bury stuff under the carpet, but it's always remaining there until you get rid of it. And it's going to become a problem if it continues too much over time. By third point, we could say that victory must be identified contextually to the political aims of the conflict and to the project of the post-war achievement. right, their post-war achievement. That is, victory is necessarily defined by the former and essentially determines the latter, right? That's concretely the problem with victory. It's a watershed. It's supposed to be a watershed to delineate better within this political aims what, first of all, we're going to do in order to achieve that victory. It is to fight, right? But also what the consequence of that fight will be afterwards. And this would be interesting to investigate also just from a behavioral, neurological point of view. That is to say, that the shock of a defeat objectively does put down most problems, right? It can't be, it's not so univocal as I was saying before. Defeated people are dangerous, but at the same time they're broken, right? And the reason why they're broken is exactly what, what the point of that war was, right? What the aim of that war was. And the more they're broken, and the more they result incapable, at least on the grounds of which they had been challenged and they had fought, right? I don't know. You can wipe out an entire country, but then you on the battlefield, but guerrilla resistance, terrorism, that may go on for a long time. Those are actually they're hard forms of war, in a way. But the problem is that they are on a much smaller scale than it could be before. So never commit the mistake, for example, of considering guerrilla, let's say, something less dangerous in relative terms, but not even to consider it something more important, as if what was fought in the open ground for some reason was just, I don't know, a show off determined by no reason. Guerrilla fighting in poorer areas and more difficult terrain, etc., is in itself a declaration of inferiority, which, if successful, will, however, necessitate to bring the fight in open field to crush the enemy just by sheer military, by the theory of the art of war, military logic. That it's the most profitable thing, and that's why we fight in that way most of the times when we have the means. So even in there is a cost, right? It's difficult to, everybody hates terrorism easily, but the question is, terrorism may actually be the, just a pathetic effort from a side that realizes that has lost, and that what the victor is going on doing whatever hell he likes, right? So that we find it heinous because it's kind of a cowardly, and it hits the innocence, or sometimes not even, but specifically it's just a poor mean, right? Much better means would involve tanks, airplanes, submarines, and so on. But the question is exactly this, right? That there is a moment, if we fight wars to arrive to the point of not letting the enemy being dangerous anymore. We literally force him to fulfill our will, and our objective is essentially to disarm him. In whatever way that properly disarmament is meant, right? And this naturally can't take, once you disarm them in terms of, firepower, of, offensive capability proper, you still have not, it's still not over. Because that doesn't necessarily mean that for some other reason things cannot change in a while, right? This is not a perpetual thing that once it's settled, it's going to stay there forever. That's where the risk is. That's why victors should be very aware of what they have achieved, and being very, very consistent to explain what it is, right? point, last of the tetralogy, this individuation of victory contextually to the political aims must distinctly conceive the realization of political goals as a project that takes place throughout the conflictual process itself, and which has its center the still laborious and painful fabric of their achievement. That is to say, most of what we struggle for is defined exactly in the moment in which we struggle for it. That is what mostly perhaps complicates the picture, because the reason why we fight is not that we automatically know that that fight will be won the more we invest in it, right? Because this, first of all, is connected to the background, to the context. Well, why are we fighting for? What value we give to the aim? So how is worth it? But also, we do not properly know what the situation will change like because of what the fight will itself will produce. And it's literally very hard and painful to achieve this, right? The greater our achievement is. And that's why there is a conflict and we fight in the first place, right? We're not, in war, as we've seen, we're not acting against a passive matter. There is someone striking back. And if they do, it's because they are confident they can definitely win their own way. Always reflect about this. So in the definition of victory that we have given, that there is therefore the dominant persistence of the political, cultural conscience and intelligence of a community that insists on the whole conflictual process. It's not one person that decides. There's a political aim and context. Then there is culture, broadly meant. That is how we define victory. Not just for what it has to achieve, but what we want it to actually mean for us. And also for the enemy to not to vanify our fort, or not to render it too expansive at least. So there must be a conscience, right? We have to be aware, first of all, of this, and we have therefore to take responsibility for it. Those who control the majority of resources, which doesn't mean the elites, it can be just like the majority of the population, must be wary of what this whole thing means, and must therefore be intelligent, must be able to read through the thing, must not be exposed to the idea, we're the good guys, therefore we win. Because that is irresponsible for your own community. That lowers the guard incredibly. It exposes you to, it makes you weak and vulnerable in a way that the enemy is just craving for you to be. So you have to insist on it. The conflictual process does not stop in a day. It's something very long. Wars are fought sometimes for a very long time, but the time conflict has been there is even longer. And if it brought to war, it's likely, most of the times, exactly because there was a mishandling of the situation, right? Which doesn't mean, even in there, that violence should not be allowed, because in absolute terms, violence is always there. It just intensifies with war, fundamentally. But the question is how much vision there is about the necessity of doing it, which can be necessary indeed. So you understand from this video why we study von Clausewitz so much, because this participation is as if it was an inevitable invasion that firmly occupies the entire military field. That is, the military is properly an instrument of politics. It's wired with it and with society. They're all part of all three. They're the same thing at the end of the day. They're the same community, right? And this is a dramatic thought that von Clausewitz had already defined in his time with the famous phrase of war as a continuation of politics by other means. Therefore, the definition of victory is the first tool to be prepared and the most important to obtain if we really wanna make it through what we have determined. And once again, this is not building castles in the air. This is literally realizing that that victory must not just be achieved for our own standards, but also the ones of the enemy. Because otherwise, the thing will not end. Or at least it may go wrong. Or it may not be controlled. It may not reflect our own expectations. It may be something we fundamentally failed in realizing. And it's exactly that realization that makes the thing done. It is exactly the idea of even of the need of continuing to fight, to not to stop. That this is a work going on. It's not a match. It's not a game. It's something that you have to struggle hard for, and that nobody would normally get into, if not for a good motivation, for a good reason. So, this is, I hope, I don't know how clear it was, but I hope that the difference between what we're used to normal think, and this is also a cultural and political thing in our own world today, right? The same vision of victory eventually influences certain aspects. Why do you think that there are so many problems in societies, in communities, historically speaking, to our own day? Essentially because people do not understand clearly this stuff. It's essentially because they get lost, they get detached from this, and part of it may not be always so bad as we think, right? Because we may not. That depends also who has control on these things. But at that point, you would even say, but if people are detached from the decisional process, that may not be that good. Well, yes, this is true, but it's not just directly proportional. Right, and that's where the problem starts. That is, you have to assess whether it's the case or not. It's not easy at all. Just as it's not easy to fight a war, or even to take the decision to partake in. But anyhow, I hope that this video was helpful in settling in expanding on the matter, because actually I plan to make at least other two about victory in these terms. And for now, I just hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time, and see you next time. Bye.